At 17, I got into my dream college, Northwestern. I still remember the email. I screamed so loudly my mom came running into the kitchen. That should have been one of the happiest nights of my life. Instead, 2 hours later, my dad sat me down at the dining room table, wouldn't look me in the eye, and said, "Your college fund is gone." I thought bad investments, medical debt, some financial disaster. So I cried, then figured it out. Student loans, night shifts, dropped classes, second jobs, cheap apartments. I told myself, this is what adulthood looks like. Then 12 years later, at my nephew's birthday party, my older brother raised a beer, laughed, and said, "Best money Mom ever spent." And my aunt looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old. I live in Naperville, Illinois. And that was the day I found out my future didn't disappear because life was unfair. My family spent it. If you're watching this right now, comment where you're watching from. And subscribe if stories like stories hit differently for you. I read every comment. At 17, I got accepted into Northwestern University. That had been my dream since sophomore year. I had the sweatshirt already. Purple, 2 sizes too big. Bought from the campus bookstore after a tour. I used to wear it while doing homework like manifestation actually worked. Then the acceptance email came. My hands shook so badly I typed my password wrong twice. When I opened it, I screamed. My mom hugged me. My grandmother cried on speakerphone. Even my older brother Jason slapped my shoulder and said, "Look at the genius." That night felt like proof that hard work actually changes your life. I had no idea the same evening would become the beginning of something completely different. 2 hours later, my dad asked me to sit down. Dining room table. Same place we signed birthday cards and argued over report cards. He looked exhausted. Not angry, not cold, just defeated. My mother stood near the sink with her arms crossed. Then my dad said, "Emily, the college fund is gone." That was it. No long explanation. Just those words. I asked what happened. Bad investments? Emergency bills? Something medical? My mother answered before he did. Life happened. That sentence lived in my head for years. Everything changed fast after that. Northwestern became impossible. Private tuition, housing, books. I cried in my room for 2 straight nights. Then I enrolled at a state school instead. Took loans. Applied for grants, picked the cheapest housing possible, started working evenings at a grocery store. That's how adulthood started for me. Not freedom, survival math, tuition due dates, gas money, shift coverage. I told myself this happens to lots of people. Families lose money, life gets messy. I believed that version completely. My brother Jason was 2 years older, and somehow, his life always looked smoother. Parents helped with his apartment deposit, covered emergency car repairs, paid legal parking tickets, bought him groceries randomly. Small things that felt normal individually. But looking back, the pattern becomes obvious. At the time, I thought, he just needs more help. Some families have one responsible kid and one messy kid. That felt normal enough. I had no reason yet to connect his easier life with my missing future. My dad changed after that conversation. Quiet in a different way. Distracted. He stopped asking about school the way he used to. Stopped looking directly at tuition bills when they arrived at the house. He still helped with practical things. Oil changes. Moving boxes. Furniture assembly. But emotionally, something felt missing. I thought maybe he felt ashamed about the lost money. That interpretation made him easier to forgive. Because guilt makes more sense than betrayal when you love someone. If this story is hitting you emotionally, comment where you're watching from right now. And don't forget to subscribe. I'm reading every single comment. For almost 6 years, I worked nights. Grocery store cashier, campus library desk, restaurant hostess, later, hospital admin temp work. I studied between shifts, ate vending machine dinners, missed birthdays, dropped one chemistry class because I physically couldn't stay awake. I used to tell myself struggle builds character. That line sounds noble when you're young. It feels different when exhaustion becomes your personality. Still, I never blamed my parents, because in my mind, they'd suffered financial loss too. That belief protected them. Jason had this habit of joking about responsibility. At family dinners, he'd say things like, "Emily was born 40 years old," or, "She actually enjoys spreadsheets." Everybody laughed, even me, because that became my role. The reliable daughter, the practical one, the one who'd figure it out. Labels matter more than people realize, because once a family decides you're the capable one, they start assuming your sacrifices cost less. When I was 24, my grandmother said something strange. We were folding napkins after Thanksgiving dinner when she smiled and said, "You were always so generous about your brother." I asked what she meant. She looked confused, then changed the subject. At the time, I let it go. Families say weird half-sentences all the time, but years later, that moment came back with terrifying clarity, because confusion in older relatives usually means somebody told them a different story. 12 years later, I was at my nephew's 9th birthday party. Jason grilling burgers, kids running through sprinklers, beer coolers in the yard, loud summer music, normal family chaos. Then Jason, already tipsy, laughed with two friends and raised his drink, saying, "Best money Mom ever spent." Everybody near him laughed, except my aunt. She went completely silent. That silence changed everything. About 20 minutes later, my aunt found me near the kitchen island. She looked genuinely unsettled. Then quietly asked, "They never told you?" I asked, "Told me what?" She stared at me for a long second like she was recalculating an entire family history, then said, "Oh my God, you really don't know." That sentence changed the entire shape of my life. My aunt pulled me into the laundry room away from the party noise, dryer humming, half-folded towels, kids screaming outside over water balloons. And then she asked, "They really told you the fund was just gone?" I said yes. She looked genuinely horrified. Not awkward, not guilty, horrified. Then she sat down slowly and said, "Emily, your brother got arrested when he was 18. That sentence didn't even make sense at first, because Jason had plenty of dramatic stories, bad breakups, bar fights, debt. But arrested? That was completely new information. It happened the summer before I started college, a fight outside a sports bar in downtown Chicago. One punch. Wrong person. The guy hit his head during the fall. Hospital, police, charges. It became serious fast. My aunt said everyone was terrified Jason might actually face prison time. I just stared at her. Because during that same exact summer, I was shopping for dorm supplies and comparing meal plans, living inside a completely different reality. That detail made me physically sick. 2 children in the same family, one protected by information, one protected from it. Then my aunt said the sentence that rewired my entire life. "They used your college fund. Not part of it. Not borrowed temporarily. Used it. Attorney fees, settlement negotiations, damage control, legal cleanup. Everything." I remember laughing. Actually laughing, because some truths are too absurd for your brain to accept immediately. Then I asked, "No. What money?" And my aunt looked at me like I was a child asking a question everyone else already understood. My aunt explained the version everyone else had heard. Apparently, the family was told I agreed. That I'd chosen independence. That scholarships made college manageable. That I wanted to do things myself. I stood there holding someone's folded beach towel, feeling like the floor had moved. Because for 12 years, people thought I made a noble choice. Not that something had been taken. Narratives are powerful, especially when they make selfish decisions sound respectable. I asked the question that mattered most. Grandma knew? My aunt nodded, then immediately added, "She thought you said yes." That detail mattered, because my grandmother loved me fiercely. She would have never accepted theft disguised as parenting. But consent changes everything. And somebody had given her that version. That explained Thanksgiving. The weird comment, the confusion, the unfinished sentence. Moments that never made sense suddenly snapped into place with brutal clarity. If this story is hitting you emotionally, comment where you're watching from right now. And don't forget to subscribe. I'm reading every single comment. While I was still processing everything, Jason walked into the laundry room looking for more beer. He saw my face, saw my aunt, and immediately knew something was wrong. Then he said, "Seriously?" Not confused, annoyed. That reaction told me more than any confession. Because innocent people ask what happened, guilty people recognize the moment truth arrives. I asked him directly, "You used my college fund?" He rolled his eyes, actually rolled his eyes, then said, "You had scholarships anyway." That sentence hit harder than the secret. Because theft is one kind of betrayal. Entitlement is another. He genuinely believed my suffering cost less because I looked capable of surviving it. Jason's wife Melissa walked in halfway through. She heard enough to stop cold. Then asked, "What fund?" Nobody answered immediately. Jason looked trapped. Moments like that stretch strangely, longer than they should. Then my aunt quietly explained. Melissa's face changed completely, because apparently, even his wife didn't know. My mother entered after hearing raised voices, looked around the room once, understood the situation instantly. No confusion. No. What's happening? Just immediate calculation. That told me she already knew exactly what was exposed. Then she looked at me and said, "This is not the place." People say that when truth becomes inconvenient. I asked one question. "Did you take it?" My mother answered without hesitation. "We saved this family." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "We panicked." Not, "We meant to fix it." Saved this family. That wording mattered. Because in her mind, the decision was still righteous. And standing in that laundry room surrounded by birthday balloons and detergent, I realized this story was much uglier than simple theft. My father had been standing near the hallway for longer than I realized, quiet, watching, looking older than I remembered. Then he stepped into the laundry room and said, "Enough." Everyone stopped talking. Even Jason. That mattered because Jason never really stopped talking unless someone forced him to. Then my father looked directly at me. Not my mother. Not the floor. Me. And for the first time in 12 years, I saw the exact same expression he had the night he told me my college fund was gone. He said, "Your mother didn't want to tell you the truth." Silence. Then, "Neither did I." That landed harder than I expected. Because betrayal from one parent hurts differently than betrayal from both. He admitted the night at the dining table wasn't about financial collapse. The money still existed then, at least for a little while. Jason's arrest happened weeks later. And from that point, everything changed. That timeline made it worse, because this wasn't long-term poverty. It was a decision. My father explained how fast things escalated. Lawyers, hospital bills, threats of criminal charges, settlement conversations, reputation panic. He said everyone kept insisting immediate action mattered. That delay could destroy Jason's future. My mother believed protecting him justified anything, including using money set aside for me. He said he argued at first. That detail mattered. But then he said, "Arguing isn't the same as stopping something." That sentence stayed with me. Jason folded his arms and said, "I was 18. As if age erased consequences. Then, it wasn't intentional. That may have been true about the punch, but intention doesn't erase outcomes, and it definitely doesn't explain 12 years of silence. Melissa stared at him like she was meeting a stranger. My aunt looked disgusted, but Jason still seemed more irritated about exposure than guilt. That detail told me a lot. Then my father said something I wasn't expecting. He tried to repay it. Quietly. Over years. Small amounts. Separate savings. Side consulting work. Extra overtime. He never got close. Life kept happening. Car repairs. Medical costs. Mortgage pressure. And each year the gap looked bigger. That explained his distance. Not innocence, but guilt. A different kind of damage. If this story is hitting you emotionally, comment where you're watching from right now. And don't forget to subscribe. I'm reading every single comment. Jason's wife finally spoke, very calmly, which somehow felt sharper than yelling. She asked, "So your sister paid for your freedom?" Nobody answered immediately, because the sentence was brutally accurate. Jason muttered, "That's dramatic." Melissa looked at him and said, "No, it's arithmetic." That line changed the room, because sometimes the cleanest truth comes from the newest person in the family. My mother refused to apologize. That shocked Melissa. Didn't shock me. She said, "Families make sacrifices." I asked, "Did anyone ask me?" No answer. Then she said, "You survived." That sentence hit like ice, because survival is not consent, and people who justify harm often point to resilience, like it excuses what they did. My grandmother walked in because the party had gone strangely quiet. She immediately sensed something was wrong, then asked, "What happened?" Nobody wanted to answer. So I did. Briefly. Clearly. Her face changed in real time. Then she looked at my mother and said, "You told me Emily agreed." My mother said nothing. That silence answered everything. My father sat down heavily and rubbed his face, then finally said the sentence that ended every false version of this story. "No, we didn't save this family." Nobody moved. Then he looked at Jason and said, "We saved him." Then he looked at me and added, "And we sacrificed her." No one in that room recovered from that sentence. I looked around that laundry room at every person who had known some version of this truth, then asked the only question that mattered. Did anyone ever plan to tell me? Nobody answered. Not Jason. Not my mother. Not even my father. Silence filled the entire room. And silence is its own kind of confession. I didn't scream. Didn't throw anything. Didn't give anyone the dramatic reaction people probably expected. I picked up my purse, told my nephew happy birthday, and walked out. That was somehow harder than staying, because calm exits require a different kind of control. Behind me, I could hear voices rising. My mother calling my name. Jason arguing. Children still laughing outside because they had no idea an entire family history had just collapsed beside the laundry machines. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes before starting the engine. Not crying, just trying to understand what my life actually had been. My phone started ringing before I reached the highway. My mother. Then again. Then again. I let it ring. Eventually she left a voicemail. Not an apology. An explanation. She said, "You're being emotional and leaving without context." That sentence told me everything, because context had apparently included 12 years of lying. She still sounded more frustrated about timing than truth. As if the real problem was that the story came out at a child's birthday party instead of somewhere more convenient. About an hour later, Jason's wife Melissa called. Her voice sounded shaken. She apologized for calling late, then said she had no idea. Not about the fund, not about the arrest details, not about any of it. That mattered, because for the first time that day, someone wasn't defending themselves. She just sounded devastated. Then she said, "He let you carry that for 12 years. That sentence landed harder coming from someone who loved him. Jason texted around midnight, short messages first. "Can we talk?" Then, "You're making this bigger than it was." Then, "You still got an education." That one made me put the phone face down. Because some people reveal themselves most clearly when trying to minimize harm, he still measured damage by outcome: degree earned, life survived, bills paid. As if suffering only counts when it destroys you completely. That night I opened a drawer I rarely touched. Pulled out old student loan statements, past due notices, tuition confirmations, payment schedules, numbers I had spent years trying not to think about. I sat on my apartment floor doing rough math. Interest, missed opportunities, years lost. The amount looked different now. Because debt feels one way when life happens. It feels completely different when life was deliberately rearranged. If this story is hitting you emotionally, comment where you're watching from right now. And don't forget to subscribe. I'm reading every single comment. The next morning, my grandmother showed up unannounced, coffee in one hand, still wearing the same cardigan from the party. She looked heartbroken. The first thing she said was, "I thought you agreed." And I believed her. Because grief looks different from guilt. She sat at my kitchen table and cried harder than I did. Not because money was gone, because she realized she had spent years admiring a sacrifice I never made. Later that evening, my father came by. Alone. That detail mattered. He looked exhausted in a way that made him seem 10 years older. He brought an old accordion folder. Inside, partial savings records, transfers, account notes, amounts he'd tried setting aside over the years. Not enough, not even close, but real. He said, "I kept thinking I'd fix it before you ever knew." That sentence hurt because intentions don't refund time. My mother called again. This time I answered. I asked one simple question. "If I never found out, would you have told me?" Silence. Then she changed direction. Started talking about family pressure, Jason's future, emergency choices, difficult motherhood. But she never answered the actual question. Because sometimes avoidance is the cleanest answer you'll get. Melissa called again 2 days later, this time calmer. She told me she'd asked Jason direct questions. Questions about the arrest, the settlement, the lies. And apparently his answers made things worse. She said, "I married someone I thought was reckless when he was young, not someone still proud of this." That sentence stayed with me. Because even now, Jason's biggest problem wasn't what he did at 18. It was who he still was at 29. By the end of that week, I stopped answering most family calls, not to punish anyone, to think. Distance creates clarity. And for the first time in years, I started remembering details differently. Every overnight shift, every tuition panic, every time my mother praised independence, every joke about me being the responsible one. Patterns look very different once you know what they were protecting. 4 days later, my mother showed up at my apartment. No warning. Same controlled posture, same neat coat, same expression she wore when she wanted difficult conversations to go her way. I let her in because part of me still wanted something impossible. An apology. A real one. She sat down, crossed her legs and said, "Enough time has passed." 4 days. That was apparently enough time in her mind for 12 years of deception. That sentence told me this conversation would not be what I hoped. I asked the same question one more time, very clearly. "If I never found out, would you have told me?" She looked at the bookshelf instead of me, then said, "That's not productive." Not productive. That phrase landed harder than yelling ever could. Because productive conversations are for scheduling conflicts, not stolen futures. And in that exact moment, I got my answer. No, she never planned to tell me. My mother explained her logic like she was presenting a case. Jason was young. One mistake could ruin everything. Families protect their own. I had options. I was responsible. I would recover. She listed those reasons like facts, and every sentence made the room colder. Because when people justify betrayal long enough, They start sounding convinced morality was on their side. Then she said the sentence I still think about. You were always the stronger one. Some parents think that sounds like praise. It doesn't. Not in that context. Because strength became the excuse, the reason I was chosen to absorb the loss, the reason nobody asked permission, the reason my pain looked manageable enough to spend. I looked directly at her and said, "You didn't believe I'd be okay. You believed I'd stay quiet." She didn't answer immediately. That mattered. Because people react differently when they hear the exact truth. Then she stood up and said, "I did what mothers do." No. She did what frightened people do. She protected the child who demanded saving, and spent the one she assumed would survive. If this story is hitting you emotionally, comment where you're watching from right now. And don't forget to subscribe. I'm reading every single comment. The next week, my father mailed me an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check. Not a huge amount. Nowhere near what was lost, but enough to show effort. There was also a handwritten note. Just one sentence. "It should have been yours from the beginning." I sat holding that note for a long time. Because accountability arriving late is complicated. It doesn't undo damage, but it does tell you who finally stopped lying. Jason called once. I answered. He sounded irritated more than remorseful. Said the family was falling apart over old history. Asked what I wanted him to do now. That question exposed everything. Because regret asks how to repair. Entitlement asks why consequences still exist. I told him, understanding what you took would be a start. He had nothing useful to say after that. A month later, Melissa called. She and Jason had separated, not only because of what happened at the party, because of what came after. The excuses, the minimization, the lack of remorse. She said, I could understand a terrible mistake at 18. I couldn't understand pride at 29. That sentence stayed with me, because time reveals whether bad decisions became lessons or identity. My grandmother invited me over for lunch a few weeks later. Before I left, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a modest savings bond she'd kept untouched for years. Not life-changing money. That wasn't the point. She said, "This one is actually yours." That sentence broke me more than anything else, because sometimes the smallest gestures acknowledge the largest theft. For years, I believed adulthood simply arrived harder for me. More shifts, more debt, more exhaustion, more compromise. I told myself life had been unfair, but unfairness is random. This wasn't random. This was a decision, a family decision. And the hardest truth wasn't losing money. It was learning the people who were supposed to protect my future had quietly reassigned it. I thought my college fund disappeared because life happened. The truth was, my family spent it to protect the person who caused the damage. I thought adulthood broke me early. The truth is, my family billed me for my brother's mistakes.